That's Nick.
That's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Nutcrackers, the 17th film directed by David Gordon Green, which premiered as the opening night film of the 2024 Toronto International Film Festival.
Did David Gordon Green do the trio of new Halloween films?
Yes.
Okay, and then he did The Exorcist Believer.
Yep. And I believe we'll not be continuing on with ruining that unnecessary continued franchise. But
Are there films of his you like?
yeah, I mean, he in the late 2000s, he kind of broke out of being an indie director and had that, I think, a trio of very broad comedies like The Sitter and Your Highness. That Your Highness I really didn't like. Pineapple Express was okay. I really miss the days when he was starting out, like George Washington was his debut, which is excellent, or All the Real Girls. I think when I talk about him, I always have to reference this Nicolas Cage film I think that is fantastic called Joe from 2013. And even that same year, he did a film called Prince Avalanche, which is a remake of an Icelandic film, I believe. But yeah, so I think whenever he dips into trying to meet mainstream standards in genre, particularly like horror or comedy, I feel disappointed. So when it was announced that this was the opening night film of Toronto, I was not excited for it.
Okay, what is Nutcrackers about? This is the current IMDb premise. In the most unlikely of places, four siblings find a loving shelter in an unexpected turn of circumstances. This endearing comedy drama draws inspiration from actual events and deftly crafts a gripping story that unites everyone. I don't know that I agree with that one. Another premise says a workaholic, Mike, has to travel to rural Ohio to look after his recently orphaned nephews. What is my pull quote? Nutcracker's predictable ending is made even less impactful with its mess of a script, which manages to withhold a lot of humor and dilute sentimentality. I was shocked that this movie didn't make me feel as much as it should, considering it's about four young boys whose parents were killed suddenly and we're trying to find a home for them. Of course, predictably and based on the IMDb premise, you already know that their uncle's going to ultimately assume guardianship. And then as a comedy, there are humorous moments. I did giggle quite a bit, and there's one moment where I laughed a lot, but it feels like it almost felt like it didn't want to be too funny, which in my book is you can never have too many hats, shoes, gloves, or laughs. But anyway, that's the quote ad fab.
I was
Uh,
gonna say, yeah, I feel like Ben Stiller sometimes tries to walk this fun, like with that film Brad Status, which was also TIFF, directed by Mike White, is kind of having this semi-serious comedy. But I felt like the film might be, well, you don't expect a film like with that premise that's an American comedy not to end predictably. But the screenwriter, Leland Douglas, his last major screenwriting credit was for a Dean Cain movie called, what was it called? Bed and Breakfast, Love is All You Need, or something like that.
so we knew we were in trouble. The story is very simple. Ben Stiller plays this guy named Mike, and he's like a yuppie corporate, like real estate guy. It's very generic. And of course, like the biggest deal of his career is in the works when we see that he has to make a sudden trip to Ohio because his sister and her husband were killed in a car accident. And it has taken him like 2 weeks to get home. And he's only even, well, home to her home to sign some papers to like assist in his nephews being transferred to like foster care. So he seems to have no concern about these boys, and he's somewhat estranged from his sister. He gets there, and the CPS worker says, well, we need you to watch them because the foster family I had lined up fell through. And he's saying, like, well, I think it's like Thursday. He's saying, I have to be back to Chicago by Monday. And she's like, well, I mean, I don't know what's more important than your four nephews finding a home, but okay, I'll do my best. But immediately we realized that Mike's entire mission is to find them a home. And it basically amounts to him putting on a production of the Nutcrackers. So this is like a holiday movie. It's 3 weeks before Christmas, with the goal of people seeing how talented the nephews are because two of them can dance. Well, one in particular used to take dance classes because the dead mother had a dance studio. And the other ones are really creative and cute. So if everyone sees how great they are, everyone will clamor to take them. But of course, in the end, Ben Stiller decides that he will raise his nephews. The end.
So like a horrible, tragic event leads to something that sounds like Dance with Me, starring Vanessa L. Williams.
Oh, which we reviewed in our podcast. Um, to start, so Ben Stiller, I think this character needed to be a younger, more attractive man based on the script and how people are talking about him and also his position in life. I mean, he's acting like he's a 40-year-old who's on the brink of like blowing up in his career, and he does not have the space to raise four boys. But then you get Ben Stiller's ass showing up, who looks like he's about to retire.
He's in reality gonna be able to collect Social Security in a couple years.
To me, it doesn't make sense that he's acting like he couldn't do this or like, and then we have a couple characters referring to him as like this handsome stud or bachelor. We also hear him explain that he doesn't have a girlfriend and that he's only ever had one. It all sounds like someone who should be like 15, 20 years younger than the actor we see on the screen. There's also very little sentimentality. Like he's not, I mean, I don't have a thought about Ben Stiller, but the movies I do recall of his, he's kind of the same, a little dry and silly. So seeing him in this film, it just seems like this situation is kind of an inconvenience for him. So because the main character is not really taking it seriously, I didn't feel anything. So by the time we get to the climax, which was very anticlimactic because we spend like 30 minutes working, like 20 minutes working on this reimagined version of the Nutcracker. And they've rented a studio. Ben Stiller's good at putting things together. So like he did radio promo, a news cruise outside. It's a sold out theater. One of the boys overhears Ben telling the CPS worker, like, we need to find these kids a family because I can't take care of them. And I don't want to. They get upset, which is so confusing to me because everyone knows, like openly, he's telling everyone, including the boys, we need to find you somewhere to go. So why anyone would be mad that he says it one final time doesn't make sense to me. But the kids get upset and decide not to perform. So he cancels the show. And then the boys decide to put on the show in the street, like on Main Street. So block all the traffic. But the entire town was there, so it didn't matter. And that's when Ben sees how special they are, I guess, and decides to raise them. And throughout the film, the oldest son, Justice, and I only remember that because of Poetic. Shout out to Janet Jackson. But he, throughout the film, asks Ben, when I wake up tomorrow, are you going to be here? And he says it like 4 times. So in the end, Ben acknowledges, like, I'm gonna take care of you. But the boys, they're very cute. I believe they're brothers. I thought they all looked like some form of a Drew Barrymore, but I'm so confused by the writing of these boys because the opening of the film, they're like little hellions. They break into a carnival and tear up a Ferris wheel and cause a lot of damage. But then sometimes they seem kind of sweet, but then other times they seem kind of vile. And I'm sure someone will comment that that's how children are. And maybe that's true, but I don't know, just as an audience member who's not used to raising children, it just seemed kind of chaotic in a way that felt messy. Like, I would think, like, based on their upbringing, because it seems like their parents were good, present parents who took, like, because the boys are constantly referring to, like, the things their parents taught them. So it seems like they had a solid. So how is it that in 2 weeks they've gone completely feral is beyond me. And I think I found that grating in addition to, I think, as we all know, directing children is probably very difficult. And maybe it doesn't help that I watched the film Vermiglio yesterday and thought that those child actors were superb.
Directed by Maura Del Poro.
That in
Uh,
comparison.
yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of twee and kind of lazy comedy writing going on. And from what you told me also about the children acting, it sounds like how they characterize the little people in that terrible Under the Rainbow film starring Carrie Fisher and Chevy Chase. Um,
Yes.
and it sound and also because we had already discussed this film was that these children had been homeschooled, which also doesn't make sense for how crazy they're acting. And it seems like there's kind of a lost opportunity to do something really fun and weird by what if the parents that are dead had been kind of like the parents in Dogtooth and purposefully kind of fed their children wrong information so that they're completely kind of kittywampus out here. But you also mentioned that the revisionist Nutcracker that they're putting on, you said there are samurais.
Yeah.
That reminded me of the men who are in prison in Sing Sing, that Coleman Domingo movie. The play that they're putting on is just this hodgepodge of random elements.
Well, those references I feel like could have worked really well. And I was thinking maybe they could have, like maybe the film would have been propelled by this reimagined Nutcracker that is in the vein of like a Waiting for Guffman. And then the audience, like us, we don't realize until close to the end that the purpose of this is to hopefully find a foster family for these boys. But I think because everyone knows what's going on from the very beginning of the story, I just wasn't that concerned for these boys. They don't seem like they are that concerned about finding a family. At one point, they say that they want to be adopted by the richest man in town, played by Toby Huss, whose character's name is Aloysius Wilmington. And Ben Stiller says, "Oh, yeah, well, let's go try to do it." So they set up this scene in a grocery store where they bump into him and he invites them to his holiday party. And Ben Stiller straight up asks him at the holiday party, because the boys up to this point have been kind of like well behaved and cute. He asked him, "Will you be their foster dad?" And he says, "Well, maybe, because my wife, we're empty nesters. She would love that energy. She'd love some boys to take care of." But then, of course, the boys screw it up by there's like a golf cart nativity scene situation that causes Toby Huss's character to get upset. But speaking of that option, there's a character in the film who I really liked. Her name is Edi Patterson, who reminded me of if you mix Molly Shannon and Catherine Keener. And I thought she was really cute and fun, except that her character is this local lady who seems to have the hots for Ben Stiller, which again, I think this needed to be like, you had mentioned earlier, like a James Marsden type or a Ashton Kutcher, literally anybody like a little better looking and younger. Like, I feel like,
Scott Speedman.
yes, so many, like, it just seems odd. Like, she's lusting after Ben Stiller, but then she's also wanting the $800 a month you get for foster kids. And we know that because she says it.
For having a kitty farm, yes. She's from the Righteous Gemstones, and that whole team is also behind. Danny McBride and Jody Hill are all producers on this. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't understand. Her character was confusing to me and felt overwrought. I do want to mention the scene that made me laugh out loud is the boys are feral in this house, and whomever, like the production designers who set up the home, they did a hell of a job because it looks like pure chaos in there. But the boys are just eating like Cheetos with ketchup on them or raw ramen noodles. But at one point, they say, "We want fresh chicken." So, of course, Ben Stiller's like, "Oh, finally, something moderately nutritious." Well, he goes in the refrigerator and the boys are like, "There's no chicken in the refrigerator. We live on a farm. Like, you need to go to the chicken coop." And then they start chanting, like, "Kill it, cook it, put it in a pot." Like Lord of the Flies, like they're holding knives and they hype up Ben Stiller. And he's wearing his fancy, city slicker clothes. And he goes into the chicken coop, catches the chicken. And the boys are like, "Oh, got you. This was just a test. We know how to kill and cook a chicken. Like, we grew up on a farm. We just wanted to see if you do it." But when he's holding the chicken, one of the boys goes, "That's Elizabeth." So then we cut to them at the dinner table and Elizabeth has been cooked. And Ben Stiller feels bad because he feels like he knows her. So he's saying like, oh, poor Elizabeth, I want to give honor to the earth for providing us with this food. And one of the younger boys says, she's Delishabeth. And I,
They should start putting the animals' names that we're eating in the grocery store that are packaged. Like
could you imagine?
this was Diana. She was 13 years old. She really liked the brown part of the grass.
You really like to.
And that also reminds me of in Speak No Evil, that's the plot point that James McAvoy gets Mackenzie Davis to eat the cooked goose, is that it was our prized goose named Libby.
I'm not talking a lot about the boys because I mean they're like cute kids, but I didn't think their acting was the strongest. I feel like they seem like those the characterizations feel odd to me. And I think I was hoping for something more along the lines of Talladega Nights. I wanted these badass kids to like wreak havoc, but in reality, it's like I mean, honestly, I think the actors were cute, but I think the characters were annoying. Like, I was just annoyed by them. And yes, they're kids. I'm sure people will comment that that's how kids are, but I would encourage people who think that to watch this movie and get back to me on whether or not these seem like, based on their situation, that these kids' behavior seemed reasonable, because that's what prevented me from feeling emotional. And then because the humor feels like they're holding back,
Well, it sounds like Ben Stiller's playing the same person he always does, this kind of guy with a stick up his ass that's annoying and rigid and learns to let loose a little bit.
it just feels like you had mentioned this earlier, like lazy comedy writing. There's a scene in particular because the boys are homeschooled and Ben Stiller's responsible for that now. So he says, okay, let's get started. What section are we on? Sex ed, sex ed. And then we get this really like basic where they're talking about penises and vaginas and how to make babies. And it's not even that edgy. And I wonder, I think this film might be rated R, maybe, because I think I heard the F word more than once. It does not feel that edgy. Also,
Welcome to the current state of American cinema. Not that edgy.
yeah. But I didn't, I mean, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know this was David Gordon Green until the person who announced it said it. And the person who announced it was someone who announces like the midnight screenings.
Mhm.
And they claimed that they liked the Halloween movies, but they seemed like they were kind of cool on this one.
Here's something you need to keep in your back pocket. Don't believe anything that TIFF programmers say about how good a film is or whether they like it.
Ooh, shots fired.
No, you can't believe that. Have you read the TIFF program book? If those poor people have to write glowing things about all these films, and there's a large majority, especially more mainstream offerings that they have in their program that are like they're just straight up lying to us.
Well, I mean, not unlike that premise I read on IMDb, whoever wrote that, like that sounded like the marketing team for the studio distributing this movie. But yeah, unfortunately, I mean, I'm of the age range where like the Ben Stiller comedies of the late 90s, early 2000s are definitely like they were around. I wasn't a big fan. I mean, I mean, of all of them, I probably quote Zoolander the most, and it's not even him, it's Will Ferrell saying lose 5 pounds immediately.
Hansel, he's so hot right now. Yeah.
So I mean, I wasn't super excited about it, and then leaving the film, I was pretty disappointed. As a result, I'm giving Nutcrackers 2 out of 5.
But would you say that it ends on a note that is equivalent to nobody, but nobody can make it out here alone?
Oh, another Poetic Justice reference. Wow. Too bad you weren't wearing the Poetic Justice hoodie.
I didn't realize that. Well, I should always assume Janet's going to come up, but I didn't realize
But the
that.
hoodie you're wearing is available in our merch shop, and I think it's available in one of the like below this YouTube video. But anyway, thank you for joining me. Join us on Patreon and listen to our podcast. Bye.